Hi, and welcome to Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara, Week 1, Episode 2.
Hello.
We're going to start by summarizing Episode 2, which we just watched. I'm going to group the storylines together rather than trying to go through the whole episode.
That's a good idea.
We start with the bus station and the helicopter, and Peebo Bryson's If Ever You're in My Arms Again, as the camera alternates between Kelly and Joe. Joe gets off the bus, and he has to be escorted in by two police officers because there's such a big crowd. Santana's got her gun. Rosa's not able to find Santana. And Joe comes in, and Rosa spots Santana, and she drops the gun. Before she can pick it up, Mason steps on the gun and stops her from doing something stupid.
I thought that was surprising, actually, that he seemed to show up out of nowhere. There was nothing to indicate that he was following them or anything like that in the previous episodes.
Yeah, I mean, either he was at the bus station to see how things were going and just happened to spot her, or he had followed her there from the house where she stole the gun. Anyway, he takes the gun back home and puts it back in the drawer in the study, and Cece doesn't seem too perturbed by that.
No.
Meanwhile, back at the bus station, Joe and Marissa and Jade, instead of immediately leaving to get away from the protesters, they have a little sit for a while, chat.
Yeah, they just sort of settle in at the bus station and let the police escort the crowd out the door. And
skulking in the corner is the mysterious dragon lady, who previously had set her thugs on Joe in the last episode. Joe and the family finally decide to go home. And John is not really that interested in greeting his son. The episode has them at odds the entire time. Eventually John blows up and says that the family was nearly bankrupted by the trial, and they had to take out a second mortgage to pay for the lawyers, and he ends up really angry at Joe, and Marissa tells him he tells Joe to leave the house, but Marissa tells him that he should be the one to leave.
We actually do get a little bit of insight into what really sparked that fight and John's attitude, because he does actually have a meeting with Cece Capwell while all the commotion is going on at the bus station. And Cece Capwell, in a very sort of sinister way, indicates that he needs to try and get Joe out of Santa Barbara, and that if he doesn't keep Joe away from Kelly and kind of keep Joe from interfering in general, that the family might be threatened.
I think he mentions that he once gave John a job.
Yes, that's right. So that actually made the connection between the two as well.
So we're still not sure what Capwell Enterprises does.
No.
Or what kind of job John would have done for Cece. So that's pretty much their whole episode is just their family. And I have to say, I kind of find that family a bit boring after only 2 episodes. I think everyone's waiting for Joe and Kelly to encounter each other, but I think they're going to drag that out a little while longer.
I think so.
Because Peter and Kelly land on their private island and then get a dinghy out to the private yacht.
That surprised me, actually, that this big helicopter ride, which ended the last episode and started this episode, ended in them getting in a dinghy. That actually was not what I expected.
Well, the dinghy ended up going to a fancy yacht, so they spend the whole episode swimming and chatting, but Kelly's kind of quiet at times, and she doesn't say it, but obviously she's thinking about Joe, and Peter's not really able to...
She's not really that interested in Peter, I would say.
I guess not. She does mention one thing new, though. She mentions that they used to go on the yacht every Mother's Day, even after Mom died. So
now we know what happened to Mom.
Now we know what happened to Mrs. Capwell. Meanwhile, after coming home from the bus station, Rosa questions Santana about why she's so upset, and she thinks it's odd that she's 5 years later still upset about Channing, being shot when they barely knew each other. And then she says, well, we were more than friends, and then it turns out that she and Channing had been together for months, but they'd been hiding it. And then she reveals that she had been pregnant with Channing's baby, and that Cece had arranged for her to go to Acapulco for the summer to work at their summer house, and she'd had the baby there. So she didn't actually say what happened to the baby after that. But
I don't think she knew.
I think from the ad we saw a couple days ago, she said they took my baby. So
it did seem it sort of stretched my belief a bit that she'd managed to keep all of that from her mother for all those years, since they seem to be living and working together.
Well, she said, the way she was brought up, I assume Catholic, that she just didn't want to incur the wrath of, if not her mom, then her dad. So. And then Ted and Lakin continue their adventures. Ted sneaks onto the Lockridge property and climbs up the trellis to Lakin's window, and she is just to hide him under the bed when her mom comes in. And it's revealed that her mother is actually the dragon lady that we've been seeing. She comes in with her dog Breeze that we met last time, so that we're quite sure that it's her.
A Doberman Pinscher, so we can tell that she means business.
Yep, and her name is Augusta Lockridge. And she does not spot Ted under the bed.
No.
Breeze seems to detect him, but doesn't raise the alarm, so for a Doberman Pinscher, maybe he's not that good of a guard dog. So Ted manages to hang out there for a while and then leaves through the window without ever being detected. Then just at the end, Minx Lockridge spots him landing on the sidewalk, and she seems to have a bit of a smile on her face. I don't think she's going to give it away to Augusta that Lakin's been seeing Ted Capwell.
Well, Minx and Lincoln seem to have a bit of a connection, and I think they often confide in each other and sort of, I don't know if protect is too strong a word, but they seem to conspire with each other a little bit.
Yeah, Augusta seems to be a very stern woman, a very stern mom, so she wouldn't like the fact that she was questioning her about why she was at the beach for more than an hour.
Yeah, she seemed...
And Lincoln, confided in Grandma that she'd gone to the Capwell party and they'd spend the whole night dancing in the stables. And Minx didn't seem too bothered by that, just more chiding her choice of a Capwell, I think. And that was, I think, pretty much it for the plot. So Louise Sorel is playing Augusta Lockridge. So that is someone...
That's the name I've heard.
That I'd never heard of before. I'd originally seen Santa Barbara, but since I've seen her since on Star Trek, which I hadn't seen as a kid, and then of course now lately we've been watching Mannix and Ironside and all these shows, and we see Louise Sorel popping up in a lot of those old shows from the late '60s, early '70s that we've been watching. Almost as often as Jessica Walter. And, of course, she played Vivian Alamain several times for quite a long time on Days of Our Lives. So you may have spotted her once or twice. And I don't think we met any other new characters.
I think that was
other
the
than
big
Augusta's reveal.
Yeah.
And she was actually in the previous episode. So, but from the closing credits, they had the entire cast there, and there are at least 2 names in the credits that we haven't met yet. So I believe one of them will show up tomorrow.
Oh, that'll be exciting.
Yeah. So...
and of course this episode ended with John giving Joe the dire warning to keep away from Kelly Capwell.
Yeah.
So obviously they're going to have to end up together at some point.
And San Quentin is actually north of San Francisco.
Oh.
So he would have to pass through San Francisco to get to Santa Barbara.
All right.
So it's only about 40 kilometers north of the Golden Gate Bridge. So we probably drove by it. So, all right. Join us again tomorrow as we watch episode 3 of Santa Barbara.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Welcome back to Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Welcome back.
We've watched Santa Barbara episode 3, and we're going to summarize it.
Yes.
So Mason and Santana had some interactions today. Mason shows up at her apartment and tells her that some witnesses have come forward to say they saw her with the gun at the bus station, and that with his pull as the assistant DA, she's really going to need him.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, he's interested in Santana for romantic reasons.
And very clearly, she is not interested in him.
She ends up calling a friend of hers, a lawyer, and he says he'll look into exactly what witnesses there are, because she tells him that she can't really believe Mason. Anyway, she had agreed to meet him for breakfast, so when they do meet for breakfast, they're both drinking Bloody Marys, so I guess that's the Santa Barbara breakfast. And Mason says he's going to make a call to find out about those witnesses. He goes to the phone booth, and he only just checks with his secretary on his upcoming lunch meeting and doesn't mention the witnesses at all, and then comes back to Santana and says, "Good news, I don't think any of the witnesses are going to come forward." So he's clearly making up this story just so he can spend time with her.
Mm-hmm.
And they end up going back to her place, and she says she's going to take a nap, so he says he's going to leave, but she leaves the door to the bathroom ajar, which appears to be purposeful.
Yeah.
And then he, on his way out, looks back and sees that she's done that, and he ends up closing the door and heading towards the bathroom. So
it's very foreboding. I think that after he came back from just checking in with his office, I got the feeling she was really at that point done with him and ready to just call it a day, because she basically tries to call the lunch short, and then he decides to take her home. So I guess I was a little surprised that she just left him there to see himself out. I think I would have made sure he had left if I was anxious to not spend time with him.
Well, Mason did say, something about what had happened between them in the past.
Yes, we don't know what that was.
I don't know what that was. I don't know if this is related to the very first episode where they showed the party 5 years earlier, if Channing and Mason were both interested in Santana back then, or if it's a completely unrelated thing. I'm wondering if Santana's maybe realized that perhaps if she leads Mason on, he might be able to help her figure out where her child is.
Oh, that is
because
sneaky. Yeah,
maybe
that's
she's
possible.
got that in her head now. Now that Rosa knows, she knows it's only a matter of time before her dad finds out, and they'll probably both be interested in meeting their grandchild. So, so that could be what she's thinking, unless she's interested in Mason. I mean, that's possible.
I didn't get the feeling she was.
No, from the first 3 episodes, I didn't.
It wouldn't surprise me if she's playing him in some way to get what she wants.
Meanwhile, last time Rosa found out about the baby, so she goes to see Cece, and she confronts him with the fact that he had gotten Santana to give up the baby, and Cece's defense was, well, Channing was only 18, and he had dreams for him to become president, and that couldn't really happen with Santana involved, so that's kind of a racist attitude of Cece's, even though Rosa's worked for him for 20 years. He does not see his son with with the maid's daughter.
Well, I didn't necessarily read that into it, although that's certainly possible. I was thinking just the idea of having kind of an out of wedlock affair that resulted in a baby.
Yeah, that seemed quite concerning too. The
Yeah.
out of wedlock baby.
Yeah.
I guess in 1984 that was still, a lot, a big.
Or it might have
concern.
been, or also it might have been a thing in that class too, because it might not just be a racial aspect; it might be a class aspect. Who would have wanted his son to marry a certain type of person in a certain type of social sphere, which obviously would not be the daughter of his maid.
Mm-hmm. That could be. That could be. We may find out more about Cece's feelings on the matter.
But I certainly think Rosa had the right to be upset about the whole thing, and especially since, as she says, she basically raised Cece's children after his wife died. So she would. I don't blame her for assuming she would have a little bit more consideration than that when something came up, especially something involving her own daughter.
Mm-hmm. So that's gonna, move forward. And elsewhere, Ted and Danny are at the beach, working on a hang glider that Danny plans to jump off of a cliff in order to impress Jade Perkins.
Mm-hmm.
Jade shows up shortly after, and she seems semi-interested in Danny, I guess. Warren Lockridge shows up. Now, he's obviously a bit older than them, but it's not entirely clear if he's, he was ribbing Danny about his hang gliding skills. It's not entirely clear if that's just because he's interested in Jade too, or he's just a jerk.
Yeah.
Or he's got some other reason not to like Danny Andrade.
He's definitely portrayed as a potential rival for Jade.
So he's a lifeguard there. He mentions he's not going to rescue Danny if he crashes into the ocean, and he does seem to flirt with Jade a little bit after Danny does do the hang gliding. And then Jade has a talk with Ted and says that he knows that she knows he's interested in Lakin, and she'll call Lakin to the beach.
Yeah,
and she does show up. Meanwhile, around the same time, a movie producer shows up.
Just out of nowhere.
Just out of nowhere, saying what an amazing hang gliding feat, and she wants Danny to repeat that for a movie that she's shooting called California '84.
Oh.
And Jade sees movie star bells, or whatever the phrase is. She's seeing stars, and she's trying to figure out if she can somehow glom onto this thing and go to Hollywood with Danny, and maybe also be in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So she spent some time trying to figure out how she can propose to the casting lady that she should tag along. So that is obviously a ramp up to a summertime story for the teens.
I actually really enjoyed that whole thing because I was probably around that age when this was airing. And last episode we saw Lincoln's bedroom, and she had all these posters of Culture Club and some of the big bands from 1984. So it was just kind of fun to see these kids at the beach, and I actually really enjoyed that.
I think they said Jade was 17, I think.
Yeah.
So that's, I was 17, I guess.
A little older than me, but yeah, it was. I thought that was fun. But then she does seem to lose interest at the very end, doesn't she? Jade?
Yeah, she goes off and follows Warren off stage.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like she decides that actually, at the end of it all, Warren is more interesting than a potential Hollywood career or Danny. So.
Yeah, unless he's just playing with Danny. It's hard to tell.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. We'll find out more next episode, I'm sure.
Oh, one thing that happened while Rosa and Cece were talking. Cece was on the phone when Rosa came in, and he was telling someone to shut down rig number 27. Capwell 27.
Right.
So I'm envisioning one of those oil rigs off the coast of California.
Like those oil derricks you drive through when you're in Los Angeles.
So I think the Capwells are in oil. So that's another dynasty link.
Well, and also I think when John marched out in the last episode, he was talking about, or maybe when he met with CC, they were talking about the oil rigs.
Ah, I didn't catch that.
Yeah.
So. And his name is Capwell, so he must be an oil man.
That's a perfect name for an oil man. Yeah.
If you're not going to be a Ewing,
then
you might as well be a Capwell. So. The Perkins family, John Perkins has left the house in the last episode, and so Joe and Mom and Jade are at home, and Mom's wondering why Jade hasn't got to the beach yet. And she goes, "Well, I think you might need me," but she and Joe managed to convince her to go to the beach. Joe and his mom talk a bit, and he's adamant about going to see Kelly, and then Dad comes home, and he and the wife have a creepy conversation.
It was very creepy. Yeah, it was all about how now that he was no longer living at home, because remember he marched out at the end of last episode, he was no longer getting his needs met. So obviously referring to intimate needs, I guess.
And then he starts saying, without all my money coming in, you're not going to be able to buy anything or pay your bills. So
it was very unpleasant. Made me wonder why they'd stayed together at all, actually.
Yeah, I think he mentioned they'd been together 20 years. So.
Yeah.
And so Joe ends up going out and going to the airport or wherever the Capwell chopper pilot hangs out, and manages to trick him into telling Joe where Kelly and Peter went.
Mm-hmm.
But then the guy quickly realizes he's Joe Perkins, and Joe says, "Oh, don't worry, I won't tell anyone that you told me." But the guy makes a phone call anyway at the end. So Joe ends up going out to the harbor to wait for the yacht to return. So, meanwhile, with Kelly and Peter, they're on the yacht, and Kelly apologizes for last night. So what I'm thinking was, I'm not quite clear, but is it possible that they haven't had sex, and that was the first time they were going to have sex?
I don't know. I mean, it definitely seemed to me that the entire setup of them being on this romantic trip on the yacht for, I think it was supposed to be several days, was supposed to be a romantic interlude.
Yeah, and some of the dialogue leading up to that made me think maybe they were going to be together for the first time, but they weren't. And so now I'm thinking, with Joe in the picture, that may not be happening at all. But,
yeah, maybe. But Kelly definitely does seem to be getting less and less interested in Peter with each passing episode.
Mm-hmm. She says to him she doesn't want to feel guilty about last night. But then he says, very reassuringly, "I'll never let you go." So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. There's a lot of creepiness, actually, on the last episode between Mason and John Perkins and then Peter.
And Peter.
Yeah.
Peter, Peter not generally coming off as creepy yet, but you just think of, you've seen other fiction things.
Yeah.
And the guy who's an obstacle to the leading man always turns out to be a jerk in some way. So you kind of know that something is going to happen.
We'll find
Peter.
out. We'll find out.
Things will happen. And I think that's it for what happened.
Well, of course, the episode ends with Joe Perkins having a confrontation with C.C. Capwell.
That's right.
Right outside, I guess, on the property, actually, of the Capwell estate.
C.C. says he'll have him arrested, and that'll violate his parole.
Yeah.
And he says he's going to prove to them that he didn't kill Channing.
Mm-hmm.
And then he also mentions he's going to see Kelly. So that's something C.C. is not too happy about. So.
Yeah, Joe's not playing it safe at all. I'll be interested to see when he is no longer wearing his prison shirt. Because he still seems to be wearing his prison
and it's
shirt.
day 2, isn't it?
Yeah. I would have thought they would have another shirt at his place for him.
So Joe goes to the docks then with the binoculars and manages to spot the yacht. He's very good at spotting Kelly from miles away, as we know from the bus station. And meanwhile, Peter's driving the boat, so Kelly's just frolicking around on the deck and probably thinking of Peebo Bryson.
Which we heard a lot of this episode, too.
And then either Joe or Kelly had a flashback to, I think it was Kelly had a flashback.
Yes.
To seeing Joe with the gun standing over Channing's body.
Yeah.
Which obviously, is what led to her testifying against him. But Joe had said, I think, to his mom that her testimony, can be explained. So.
Yeah.
One other thing that I forgot to mention last time, or maybe even the time before, but Lakin talks about a Capwell-Lockridge feud briefly. So
yes,
that's some backstory that, kind of explains Minx's feeling toward the Capwells.
And we did get a very brief look at Lincoln this episode, too. Just she came and joined Jade and Danny and Ted down at the beach, really briefly. But that's really all we saw.
Ted asked her how her trellis was after he'd fallen down it, and she said she hadn't dared to look yet. So
yeah.
And that's about it.
That's about it.
So we will return for episode 4. Hi, it's August 2nd, and Misha and Dianne have just watched Santa Barbara.
Hello.
Week 1, episode 4. And the show started with a bomber.
It was a very dramatic beginning. The first shot we saw was of a bottle of very fine gunpowder. So we knew something was going to happen. And
some mysterious figure was working on a pipe bomb. Then cut to Santana's place. She's getting ready for her bath. Mason's still skulking around in her living room.
Yeah.
And she spots him.
And apparently this wasn't a play. She didn't know he was there.
I guess not. I guess she had heard the door close and thought he'd left. So anyway, he gets super creepy.
Yeah.
Says, "You didn't think I was going to rape you." Which is just, what you want to hear when a weirdo's in your living room. So anyway, she manages to get rid of him.
Yeah.
Then later, Rosa comes over and she said she doesn't trust Mason. And then the lawyer friend comes over and says that he's been checking out the courthouse and the police station, and there's not really any talk at all about any witnesses or that Santana was seen with a gun.
No.
So Santana thinks she might know why Mason would lie.
I think Santana realizes now that Mason's making way more out of this than he needs to. And I think Rosa actually says to her, she says, "Do you think he's just doing this to frighten you?" And Santana kind of has a knowing look on her face.
So I think that'll continue for as things progress. Meanwhile, Kelly and Peter have managed to dock at the marina, and the music plays as Kelly and Joe see each other.
We always know when they're going to see each other.
And then they go to commercial, and then they came back, and the music started from the beginning again, and Kelly and Joe saw each other for about 5 seconds, and then
their eyes met.
The next time we saw them, the music started, and they saw each other again. So Peter was kind of annoyed when he realized that Ted was there, that Joe was there, and dragged Kelly back into the yacht and asked, "Oh, how does he look to you?" Because he's obviously thinking, Kelly's still in love with Joe.
A little bit worried.
So I don't know, Peter.
And meanwhile, poor old Joe suddenly finds himself confronted with Cece and a couple of thugs.
Cece tells him to get out of town. He says again he's going to find the real killer, and Cece leaves, and the thugs toss him into the water. CC had threatened that the thugs were going to take him straight out of town, so I guess he avoided that because he later shows up at his mom's house just after the bomber has thrown a bomb through their front window. So Joe's ringing the bell, and the mom comes out and sees the bomb, and it goes off.
Yeah.
But she doesn't seem to be too badly injured. Joe goes in and pulls her out. Fire engines come. They put out the fire. And then a mysterious figure shows up and whispers that Joe needs to meet him at midnight at some abandoned factory or something. So that is an unexpected turn of events.
Joe also had an interesting dinner companion.
That's right. In between those two things, he managed to go to what I think might be the State Street Bistro, though it hasn't been named yet. And Augusta Lockridge comes in, pretending not to recognize him, I believe.
Yeah, they kind of introduce themselves to each other.
She and Breeze come in.
Yeah.
And he kind of defends her against the waitress who wants the dog out. And then she suddenly says, "Oh, you kind of look familiar. I've seen you in the news."
She's playing it cool.
You're Joe Perkins. So, anyway, they have a chat about, how he's innocent. And she's like, well, I may not be like everyone else who thinks you're guilty. And they have an open mind. So there's an opening there. But we know that she almost killed him 2 episodes earlier. So I think she's using the keep your enemies closer tactic there so that she can maybe find out how close he is to finding the real killer.
But we did find out that they don't know each other directly from that scene.
No, they had never met before.
Yeah.
In fact, he mentions the name Warren Lockridge as someone he sort of knows, but not very well.
Yeah, he's
so
familiar with the name.
They were at school together.
That's what I thought. Maybe they had gone to high school together or something.
So it's interesting that when he was dating Kelly Capwell, the Lockridges weren't really on his radar.
No.
The Lockridges themselves have lunch, and the topic between Augusta, Lakin, and Warren is Lakin's having a boy in her room because the gardeners reported to Augusta that someone had climbed up and broken the trellis.
That's how they're found out.
She admits that it was Ted Capwell, which doesn't go that well, and then Augusta slowly realizes he must have been in the room at the time when she was there and that he was hiding under the bed. So Lakin says, well, I'm having a date with a nerd tonight, and I promise I won't let him under my bed.
Yeah.
So, and later on, she's on her date with the nerd.
Yeah.
And it turns out Ted's in the back seat, and the nerd is Ted's friend, and it was all tricked to get Lakin away from the Lockridge house without them realizing that she was on another date with Ted.
And we kind of got to see the quirky side of Ted in this episode because it turns out the first scene he's in, he's busy balancing a tennis racket on his chin, and it turns out he is a pigeon enthusiast, and he and Danny send messages to each other via pigeon. This is, of course, before cell phones.
So Danny sends a message about tomorrow being the big day for his stunt, and then Ted sends a letter back probably about Jade, I think it was. So, and Danny wanting to be the next Eric Estrada.
Eric Estrada gets name-checked several times in this episode. Yeah.
So after the Lockridge lunch, Jade and Danny are having lunch at the same restaurant, and Warren's still there, but he's at a different table by himself now.
Yeah.
And Jade's kind of looking at him and also talking to Danny about trying to be in the movie, and then Warren comes over and teases Danny a bit. And
I was getting very mixed signals from Jade, as I think Danny was too, because on the one hand, Warren comes and sits at the table next to them, and Danny wants to leave, and Jade says, oh no, I'm comfortable here. I like being basically around Warren. But then whenever Warren makes fun of Danny, she jumps in. She says, oh, Danny's my hero, so don't say anything against him. So she's kind of playing both sides here. I don't think Danny knows how to read her, and I don't know how to read her either.
Mm-hmm. When she's talking with Danny about different ways she could be famous in the future, she could be on People magazine, and then she goes off on a Dynasty-related tangent because she says Joan Collins is on People magazine, and I could be the next Joan Collins, only 50 years younger.
Yeah.
So this, definitely the writers have Dynasty in their minds while watching the show. They definitely do. While writing the show. So, and then Santana, having told Rosa that she really is going to start looking at trying to get her baby back, she goes directly to Cece and tells Cece the same thing, that she's thinking of getting the baby back. She first tries to get into Channing's room. She says to Cece it's just because she wants to remember him. Cece says the room hasn't been opened since the day he was killed, so maybe there's some evidence in there about who really killed him that's been locked away all these years.
Made me kind of wonder what was in that room.
And does Santana have something in there that she wants to get?
Yeah.
So, and then Cece basically says, well, there's no way you can find your son because by law, adoptions have to be sealed.
Yeah.
And so there's no way they would let her find the baby. So she leaves, still determined to find her baby. He goes to the study and pulls out a drawing in crayon by, let's say, a 5-year-old boy.
Named Brandon, I think it was.
Brandon. And then he picks up the phone and calls probably Acapulco, I don't know, and asks to speak to Gina. And he asks Gina how their boy is. And that she misses Brandon.
That he hadn't talked to them for a few days. So we know he's in constant contact with what we assume to be Santana's son.
And mentions that Brandon's birthday is coming up. So I guess if he was born just after Channing was shot, then that means I guess she was quite pregnant in that first scene that we saw, even though I guess I didn't really realize that.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Yeah, it seems odd that she would be hiding it at that late date. But
maybe her little maid outfit didn't reveal very much.
And then, meanwhile, at the secret midnight meeting, the mysterious stranger...
Who seemed very petite to me.
A petite stranger with a beard and a hushed voice tells Joe not to turn around. And says that he wants to help Joe find the real killer. And that he needs Joe to trust him. And then sneaks off before Joe can reply. So I think there'll be a lot more of these 1-minute meetings coming up as Joe or the stranger tries to decide if Joe trusts them and vice versa. So.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a recurring theme throughout I don't know if it'll last, how long it'll last, but I think it'll last for a while.
So, now Joe's already got a potential lead on the real killer, so makes you wonder why the mysterious stranger didn't show up at the trial, or at any point during the 5 years since the trial.
And whether the mysterious stranger is actually trying to help Joe, or if they're trying to lead him further astray. Maybe there's some nefarious reasons. This stranger wants Joe to be following a particular trail. We don't know yet. They could be
working for Augusta. They could be the real killer.
Could be Augusta. It was a very petite person.
I guess we will find out. So this episode we had, I guess, in the last episode we had Warren introduced, and in this one we have Mysterious Stranger introduced. So we're still meeting the cast members.
And I noticed when Joe rescued his mother from the bomb, she said something like, "Oh, thank goodness Jade and Amy weren't here."
Oh, that's right. We hadn't heard
of Amy before, so that's someone else we have to meet.
That's true. I think we've covered everything that happened this time around.
I think so.
I forgot to mention in the last episode that Ted had mentioned San Ysidro Creek, which didn't sound that meaningful.
That completely.
But the reason that it was so noteworthy for me 35 years ago is because on July 18th, 1984, there had been a massacre at a McDonald's in San Ysidro, California.
Oh, wow.
And that, 2 weeks earlier. And that's the first time I'd heard of the name San Ysidro at all.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of shocking 2 weeks later to hear it just mentioned, on the show. But San Ysidro, California is near San Diego. So they're not, I doubt it's related to San Ysidro Creek, because that would be a very big creek. But probably named after the same saint, I guess.
I guess so.
So just thought I would mention that now, because it'll be never relevant again.
Probably not.
And on that note, we'll say goodbye until after we've watched episode 5. Hi, and welcome to Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
Week 1, episode 5. Original air date, August 3rd, 1984, and we watched it August 3rd, 2019. Well, let's start with a few things we forgot to mention last time that we talked about after the podcast and realized we hadn't mentioned. First of all, Joe finally got a new shirt.
Yes, that's right.
I hadn't particularly noticed it, but Diane pointed out he was wearing his prison shirt for the first few episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's switched from a prison blue shirt to a different blue shirt.
Yes, he had a plaid shirt, and in today's episode, very exciting, he actually switches to a brown shirt.
And there was a mention by Lakin that the feud goes way back.
Yes.
So that was, they talked about Cece's father and grandfather being involved in the feud. Mm-hmm. So that's something that possibly Minx is old enough to know the origins of. Also, we forgot to mention that Mason had teased Peter about his job at the hotel. I think he had sort of offered him a low-level role as assistant manager at a hotel, is what it sounded like to us. So
yeah, Mason made it sound like Peter would probably be offered a role as the front desk clerk or something like that.
And this is the first that we've heard that the Capwells also own a hotel. So
yes,
there's the Capwell Hotel as well as at least one oil rig numbered 29.
Yeah.
All right, and that was a wrap-up for what we forgot last time. So now into episode 5. And the first thing that happened was John found out about the bomb. John showed up at home, found out about the bomb, did a lot of arguing with Marissa, and said basically it was too dangerous for Jade to live there and wanted Jade to live with him.
Yes.
I think Joe came in briefly, they argued, and left again. So
John basically came in and was unpleasant, as he has been in most of his appearances, and left.
Now Ted and Lakin spent the whole time basically hanging out with Jade and Danny and flirting.
Yep.
So I think they fantasized about possible futures at one point. I think there was a lot of that in this episode by various people. At one point, Cece suggested that Ted might want to go to military school, which freaked him out because he obviously doesn't want to spend his senior year away from Lakin.
No.
And then
or in military school.
Or in military school. And then later on in the episode, when Danny was talking about going to Hollywood, Ted joked he might go with him, and Lakin didn't take too kindly to that thought that he was going to leave her.
No.
So he kind of backpedaled that pretty quickly. On the Danny and Jade front, Danny did his stunt for the director, and it was perfect on the first take. Mm-hmm. To which Jade said, "You may kiss me now." So Jade has had some good lines.
Yes. So. He didn't really take her up on it, though.
Yeah, so that's he said not right now or later or something like that. So,
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on there. So we'll see.
And Jade is still angling to get her shot in Hollywood, too. That was an ongoing thing, this story as well. Yeah,
Jade asked Danny later in the episode if he'd talked to the director, and Danny basically had introduced Jade to the director, and I guess the director basically said hi to her and didn't want to talk to her
Yeah,
any further.
yeah.
So I don't think that's going to go anywhere. But maybe she's hoping if they go to Hollywood for the summer, she'll meet some other casting director. So.
Yeah.
Danny did ask his parents if he could go to Hollywood, so we met Ruben Andrade for the first time, and he was kind of as gruff as Rosa said he was going to be.
And that was kind of a fun scene because they were in the restaurant, and Danny was sort of negotiating with his parents at one table, and then at the other table, all of his friends, so Ted and Lincoln and Jade were,
and the nerd boy,
and the nerd were sitting there watching and trying to figure out if he was succeeding in convincing his parents or not.
Now, Peter was offered the job by CC, assistant manager of Capwell Hotels.
Mm-hmm.
So there's now a hotel chain involved. And so assistant manager of a hotel chain now actually sounds like it is a good position. And he settled in, and he met with one of the other executives who mentioned that I think Ronald Reagan was coming to town, and he would be in charge of handling the rooms for that. So, and then Peter settled in with his dictation machine to dictate his resignation letter to Lyman Prep. And I thought that might be a little bit ominous.
Yes.
Because it kind of seems to me like the job is predicated on the fact that he's marrying Kelly.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
We know from millennia of fiction that the universe wants Kelly and Joe together. So I think Peter's life may, has a potential of collapsing in several ways all at once, which is possibly a potential future cause of friction between Peter Flint and the Capwells.
Peter seemed to settle in actually really quickly to his new job. So I kind of had a little bit of a sense he was already getting a little bit of an attitude. I think he's settling into being a wealthy Capwell.
Now, Santana is already booking herself a plane to Acapulco. She's on standby for a ticket that evening.
Yes.
Mason comes over to invite himself for dinner, and I guess she decides that she might get some revenge on him, so she agrees. And then when Rosa comes over, she points out that Santana's leaving all of the seeds in the chilies. So they say she was making roast lamb or roast veal, I think, but I don't know if that has a lot of chilies in it, but that's what they said. So, meanwhile, Mason is fantasizing about a future where he's with Santana, and she says that he's much better than Channing, and why did she waste all those years? And then in the fantasy, Mason's running for governor, or is the governor. So I guess that's, we have a sense of Mason's plans for himself. So anyway, Mason does come over and takes a bite of the peppers and clearly can barely manage to keep it down because it's so spicy, and she ends up taunting him by offering him more. So
I found the whole thing with Santana and Mason was really fun. When Mason and Santana were originally on the phone when they were arranging this dinner, and he was making all these sort of comments that he obviously thought were impressive, and she wasn't impressed at all. And so she was making all these faces while she was on the phone and kind of rolling her eyes.
He said, I managed to get the charges dropped. And of course, everyone knew that they were fake. So
yeah. And I really actually enjoyed his little fantasy sequence. He's obviously lusted after Santana for a really long time. And he was imagining her sort of groveling to him. And I thought that was a really interesting fantasy because it shows us a lot who Mason is. She just spends the whole fantasy groveling. He doesn't really say anything. He's just looking off into the mid-distance and fantasizing about talking a little bit about being governor. But it's obvious from watching this fantasy that not only does he want Santana, but that power is really important to him as well. So he doesn't just want Santana, he wants her to be groveling to him and acknowledging him as her right choice. Yeah.
And even after 5 years, he's still got an issue with Channing.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. That it showed that too.
So meanwhile, back at the mysterious meeting place where Joe was meeting the mysterious informant, the informant had walked off at the end of the last episode, having heard a noise, but Joe called them back, and they said, "Well, don't try to find out who I am."
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about who might have set the bomb. And Joe said he thought that Cece did it, but the mysterious person says that didn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
That Joe should really think about who might have it in for him and who would do such a thing. And then Joe mentions the other witness, the person that went to the library with him,
Mm-hmm.
that discovered Channing with him, and that vanished before the trial and never testified on his behalf and hasn't been seen.
Yeah.
So this is another good clue towards the murder mystery of and I'm thinking that Dominic may be the other person, right? Because Dominic seems to be the witness. Seems to have witnessed it in some way or knows that it is. Joe then goes to they end their meeting, and Joe goes to meet Augusta accidentally, possibly on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And Augusta, listening to his woes, just offhandedly says, "Oh, it might be better for you and your family if you left Santa Barbara," which
Mm-hmm.
is, of course, her whole thing. So now that makes me think, did Augusta maybe pay someone to throw a bomb into the Perkins house?
Yeah.
So that's a potential. Joe almost immediately gets a note, and it's from the mysterious stranger, who finally says, "Okay, call me Dominic." Says, "Do not trust Augusta."
Mm-hmm.
So Dominic must know a lot about Augusta.
Yeah.
So,
And Augusta, really, this episode, apart from that, just we saw little shots of her here and there, sort of skulking around with her dog, and that seems to be a lot of what she does.
mm-hmm. But it seems like she's concerned about Joe. I mean,
Yeah.
I think, of potential suspects for
Mm-hmm.
who could be the real killer, really Augusta's been acting the most suspicious, right?
Yes.
She tried to keep Joe out. She's trying to get him away, and she's also been kind of finding out, just through questions, what he knows or if he has any leads and things like that. So right now, I think she's a good suspect. So after thinking over what Dominic said, to think through who might have it in for him,
Mm-hmm.
he actually sneaks into the Capwell Hotel and goes to see Peter.
Yeah.
And they have a bit of an argument, but he mentions that Peter was after Kelly 5 years ago, and that he was trying to break up Joe and Kelly for his own purposes way back then. So
This is the first time we really realized that Joe and Peter actually have a history together as well.
So now we have another potential suspect,
Yeah.
because, if Peter's been hanging around the family and been interested in Kelly for that long,
Yeah.
he may have wanted to get rid of Joe to get Kelly, and, he may have had issues with Channing, maybe over that same topic or something else. So if he was a teacher at school, he may have had Channing as a student, and Kelly too, possibly. I don't know how old she would have been 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Probably would have been just graduated from high school or something.
None of them really look like they've aged much in 5 years.
Yeah, that's true.
Hmm.
So I think that was pretty much it for that scene. And then Joe, next time we see Joe, he's at a phone booth, and he calls Peter on the yacht,
Mm-hmm.
where he and Callie are spending the evening, having dinner, and disguises his voice and pretends he's Peter's new neighbor,
Mm.
and that he saw someone go into his apartment, and was thinking that it might be a burglar. So he says, "I'll call the police," and then Peter, of course, then doesn't have a reason to call the police, but Peter leaves to run to his apartment, leaving Kelly alone on the boat.
Mm-hmm.
So Joe's payphone is actually at the marina, and as soon as Peter leaves, Joe makes his way onto the boat, just as Kelly is putting a tape into the stereo. And for a second, I thought it might be Peebo Bryson's "If Ever You're in My Arms Again," but it wasn't.
We did hear that, though.
But only seconds later, as she's thinking about Joe, and Joe enters the room and she sees him. The strains of "If Ever You're in My Arms Again" begin. So we've heard the start of that song.
We've heard a lot.
Several times,
we have.
but we haven't heard a long stretch of it. Really.
No.
So we haven't heard the whole thing. So
we've just heard those beginning first through.
If they're trying to get us to buy the album, they really need to play more of that song. So, and I think that was how it ended with Joe and Kelly on the yacht. So they finally, after 5 episodes, managed to be in the same room together. And
Kelly, an offside, is actually wearing a dress that's very similar to one that I had in the early 80s. So that was a nice blast from the past for me.
Well, Mason's just been wearing suits the whole time, so I think I might have to dig up a photo of myself with Mason Capwell's hair and a similar suit that I might have had taken in the mid-80s.
Well, I'm wearing a shirt from the 80s right now. This isn't a pajama top. This is actually a real shirt that I found in my mom's trunk that is from 1986. So it's just 2 years older, 2 years newer than the show we're watching.
And just talking about a list of suspects, I'm thinking Mason is a potential suspect too, because we know he had issues with Channing. And although he didn't instigate a lot of the stuff against Joe, he was kind of doing it under Cece's direction, but he was kind of given free rein. So I think we've got 3, I would say, suspects: Augusta, Peter, and Mason. And I suppose Dominic is a potential suspect too. If you don't think that Dominic is trying to help, then that's a potential suspect too. But
it's still not clear whether Dominic's entirely trying to help or if he's trying to mislead or distract them.
Yeah, because of the secrecy, don't try to find out who I am or follow me or whatever. And don't try to tell the police about me, something like that. Dominic really wants to remain anonymous, but
he's not wrong about Augusta either.
Yeah, so we know that Augusta's sneaky.
Yeah.
So it seems to me, even with just what we've seen, that Dominic probably is hoping to help and will put Joe on the right path.
Yeah.
This week's spotlight is on Robert Brian Wilson, who played Channing Jr. on Santa Barbara. Wilson was born in 1962 in Cerritos, California. He's been married to his wife Michelle since 1995, and they have 3 children. Before Santa Barbara, he'd appeared in the horror movie Silent Night, Deadly Night. After Santa Barbara, he made appearances in Generations, Matt Houston, 30-something, Knots Landing, Perfect Strangers, Jake and the Fat Man, and one of the Gunsmoke reunion movies. He appeared in one episode of Dynasty as Tony. He is the first of 3 actors to have played Channing Jr. The other 2 were infants. He played Channing twice, once in 1984-85 during the Who Killed Channing murder mystery storyline, where he appeared in flashbacks and still photos that took place in 1979. He returned to the role for 3 episodes in 1991. His most recent acting credit is from 2016, and he now works in the trade show business.
So that was the spotlight on Channing Jr.
Very informative.
Yeah. I'm doing that because who knows how much longer we'll be seeing him. So I thought I'd better do him first. And that is it for week 1. Do you have anything else you want to summarize, or predictions for the future?
No, I don't.
Predictions for Danny's career as a stuntman?
Well, I don't know if he will end up being a stuntman or the next Eric Estrada. I guess that's something we'll have to find out. He seems to be pretty capable at hang gliding, but I don't know how he'd be at falling out of buildings or whatever else stuntmen do. So.
Now, around this time on Another World, every time summer rolled around, all of the teen characters would be in bathing suits for most of the summer. So if they go to Hollywood, they might end up not having as many bikini scenes as the producers might want. But then there is a beach in Hollywood, so...
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they really need to suck in the young viewers early on, so that's their goal. And murder mystery wise, I don't think I think it's too early to predict who really the killer is.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll find out.
Yeah. And Joan Kelly. Endgame.
Sounds good.
All right, we will see you next week for week 2 of Santa Barbara.
See you then.